Welcome back to the Recreate Meaning podcast. We have Andrew Smoother and William Tulloch on the call tonight, and we are here to talk about how to navigate a workplace. First of all, how are you doing, Andrew?
Great. I've been navigating workplaces all week. How you
Yeah.
been?
Yeah, I've been pretty well. I've been navigating the same workplace for the past 7 years. um, so I thought this might be a good topic because you've just started a new job and you've had a few different jobs since we started working together. And I thought it would be a good topic to kind of cover because people probably have issues in the workplace all around, and I think there's some valuable resources here that we can extrapolate. So, I guess the first thing that I want to bring up is having your priorities in your workplace defined. So, what do I mean by that? So, when you work in a workplace, you have a manager and you have a boss, right? Or even in some regards, you have multiple rungs of leadership. And your job, whether it be serving food or providing wood from the cutting section from Bunnings or providing a service to people in healthcare and everything like that, I feel like getting your priorities in order means you have to define what your job actually requires you to do and to do that well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely super important, and knowing that is important as well. I think on the side of managers as well, it's every job you go to, it'll be different because some jobs like I won't name, but where we work together, it was a lot smaller compared to some other jobs, and in bigger jobs, you'll never meet half of the people above you. Probably some people below you, you'll never meet either. In that kind of job, you know everyone, and so the kind of leaps potentially between you and your manager's boss can be like quite large in terms of like the rung. It's like a ladder that's only 3 rungs tall. You know, you've got to have pretty big jumps between like levels of power. Whereas, a corporation that's got like 100 rungs on the ladder, you can have more gradual increases between levels of power. And so you might have more in common, or your manager in that position might have less, still have power over you, obviously, because they're your manager. But obviously, they've got a manager who's got a manager who's got a supervisor
Mm.
who's got, and it goes on. And when you're in a position where between you and the person who owns the business is 2 people, it gets really rough because the person between you and the owner can often they either take like a point of, and I've worked jobs like McDonald's I worked where it kind of was like that, where it was like, because it was a franchise, it was a lot smaller, but it's still a corporation, but the direct owner of that franchise was like the biggest boss essentially. And then my manager, he essentially got to make the decision of, do I take the side, because you kind of have to, of the people I'm looking after and the people below me, or the corporation, the guy who owns me? Am I like a hard ass, or am I gonna like look out for the people that work under me? And at McDonald's, I was lucky enough to work under a guy who chose the people, and he was the nicest manager I ever worked for. But I've also worked for places where it's the opposite, and they're just corporate slaves and will rip you apart for any reason. And that's super rough. And I think that's one of the most important things in a job, is to have a manager who kind of understands that and has the power and uses it well, but also doesn't abuse it.
Mm.
And it's pretty rare you'll get that, to be honest.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. And this thing relates to a section that I want to talk about in the future, which is what I call the lies and the thieves of businesses. So just to extrapolate out on the priorities thing, it's like if you're working in a multiple run company, like multiple hierarchies of people, and you can define your priorities as your job, and you can also document when things aren't necessarily being run the way that the company should be run, then you have this
Mm.
ability to build a skill of argumentation. But I'll get back to that again in the future. But I think the priorities thing is that you've got to define what your job is and what your service that you have to provide. And
Yeah.
it's a moral thing because some people run the morals of you've got to follow the rules regardless. But some people follow the morals of, well, we've got to follow the rules unless it defeats the purpose of what we're actually trying to achieve. So,
Yeah.
for example, when we used to work together, there would used to be different types of managers and everything like that. But sometimes we would change how things were done just because the product that we'd give the people would be better. And I think
Mm.
that being able to define either with a manager or with even the boss to define what your job is, then you at least know a clear cut on what's yes and no to do in the workplace. And that's that flows on to the next thing of I think it's really important to remember who you work for. So
Mm.
like working under a manager that necessarily doesn't live in the values of the business and uses the power against you, you don't necessarily work for the manager as like in its entirety. You work for the boss and for the company, and that, for me as an idea, puts a barrier between me as a worker and, say, me dealing with a manager that's over the top and negative. Because it implies that you can fight back in certain regards when the business is going when business isn't running as usual. And I don't know what you think about that, but that's my phenomenological
Mm.
experience of working, because I've been able to pull up other managers. Well, I'm not a manager per se, but I've been able to pull up managers and be like, "Well, listen, buddy, I'm watching you, and you got to be careful because
Mm.
you're being irrational, and you get caught
Yeah.
out as an idiot."
Well, I think I can actually expand on that a little in the way that I think, and this was where we worked, very much relied on this system, but other places obviously wouldn't. And it's it kind of every entry level job pretty much would, but the hierarchy isn't defined by roles as much as it is how long you've worked there. And so whoever slotted in the longest ago is at the top, and then it's all the way down. And you can go through the roster there and you will see that it's very clearly top to bottom. And
Mm,
say as like other jobs, you're applying for a specific role. You're applying for a job. You're not just going in and saying, please hire me as a person. You're saying, hire me as a, director, hire me as the, I don't know, whatever you
mm,
want to do, the office manager or something like that. And so what that leads to is if you've got, say, interns in an office and you're applying for a certain job, you can be day one in the office and above people already because you've worked the role somewhere else. But in an entry level job like we did, if you leave and you go to another entry level job, you begin again. You can take the experience and the skills, but your hierarchy is immediately reset. You're straight at the bottom again,
mm.
and the 17-year-old who's been there a month is immediately above you. And you can do nothing about that because it's an entry level job. You can't realistically show any value in terms of qualifications or like experience because it's just an entry level job.
Mm.
Not everyone's going to be here forever. You're going to be there for maybe a couple years, maybe a couple months, a day. It doesn't matter. But the point is that you're starting again. And that's why with kind of more career oriented jobs, you can have that where where you move into an office and you're above people that realistically you should be above. And it works better because the people that deserve the power are generally getting the power. And that's reflected by the fact that they have the qualifications that shows they deserve to be there, rather than just, I have no qualifications, I have no experience, but I have time. And that's, I think, stupid. I think you shouldn't be immediately put to the top. Well, it's not immediately, but like over time. And if you've done a bad job, but you've done it for 8 years and you get to the top, I don't think that's a great system.
Absolutely not. And I think that's a key distinction here is you should be focusing on things that build career skills rather than getting you from dead end job to dead end job. Because
Mm.
working in an industry that's like a means to an end, like for me, for example, is it's like you see the same kind of people flow in and flow out. It's like some people have spark, some people do not have spark. And it's really it's kind of sad because these workplaces kind of, well, like a point that I want to bring up is like these workplaces almost mold your ability to work in other workplaces and also mold your ability to be social, which,
Yeah.
like, I think that's a really good point to bring up because the experiences from one workplace to another are not really comparable. But I I think there is some utility in being able to identify toxic people in the workplace and being able to move around them. And
Mm.
like there's a Piagetian idea called, well, basically the concept here is that some people are playing certain types of games, right? If you have your highest priority set, you're playing a certain type of game where your managers that might be toxic, and I'm specifically talking about toxic managers here, might be playing to their own agendas and also playing, how would I say it, a toxic, social, destructive game to your own ego. And it's like the the options that you have in that environment are quite restricting unless you're willing to take on massive amounts of emotional energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing that comes with dealing with people in power in jobs is if they're toxic, or really not, but mainly when they're kind of a toxic worker or they have those toxic traits, is you get three options. And the first option is to clash, and generally that's not a great idea. It's not going to be good for you. It's not going to be good for you, them, and it's going to lead to workplace slowing down and not
Mm.
going smoothly. Pretty much never a good idea. The other option is you can try and ignore. You can try and kind of move around in a way that there's never any clashing, but there's also never any friendliness. There's never solutions. There's never anything really.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're just two separate. You work for two separate jobs. You just stay your own ways. The third option is you can try and kind of not go out of your way or anything, but try to make it work. And generally, that's the best idea, but it's also not possible
Mm.
with everyone, as I'm sure has been shown. And even not in terms of like managers, but with new staff and that kind of thing, I think we got pretty good at generally when a new staff comes on, you can tell pretty quickly whether they're going to be here for a while or whether they're going to
Mm.
leave in a week. You can kind of gauge from the type of person. Generally, like the age of the person plays a big part. If they're 17, they're probably not going to be here long. But
Mm.
in saying that, a lot of us started when we were around that age. I started when I was 19. I think you started when you were, what, 18 or
I was
19?
16 when I started there.
You were 16.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and Darian would have been a similar age too.
Mm. And like, it's interesting though because it really just shows the temperament. Like our temperaments tend to be able to fit together, and like there is
Mm.
obviously wherever you go in a workplace, there's toxic people, and it's like out of those three options that you said, I agree with you on the fact that you could play the social game of, let's not do what the boss wants us to do. Let's not.
Mm.
Let's also tear each other down emotionally because why not? Like we might as well call each other idiots and everything like that because why not? And the third thing is like, well, I didn't even talk about the second thing, but like that resistance between people that you were talking about before. It's like we've spoken about this before, where it's like you've got to kind of just play the social game, like be a Roman when in Rome. But I'm talking about if you can catch out a couple little things here and there of a manager that's not doing very well and you pick your shots and you have
Mm.
your priorities in order, you might be able to take a shot and change their mind. And I know this is not easy and it takes a lot of courage and it's very stressful.
But the problem is you can't bring that up to them, and
Oh.
especially when it's someone in power who doesn't like that kind of feedback, as I'm sure you know,
Mm.
there's never going to be any situation where that person is like, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. I think you're right about that, and that will fix things going forward. And the way it was going wasn't healthy, wasn't working. if you've got someone in power who's constantly going to be like, no, fuck you, I'm right, the way it is the way it's going to be, whether they're the reason that, is in place, or it's just always been that way and they, might dislike change, or they might just have the
Mm,
steady kind of schedule going, and it might be that that disruption will make things much worse, even just for them. But I think with some certain people, changing something that might overall be better could cause such a drastic wave effect in their life that it's just not worth doing. And even if it would make everyone else's job in the shop easier, if one person is just going to go off the rails if one thing changes, it's just not worth it, and you kind of just stay on the main track. You just stay on what is being done.
mm,
You really never deviate from that. And I'm not going to say like any ideas I had were shut down immediately over the years. Like, there were definitely ideas that I put forward occasionally that were put into place and worked well. There were ideas I put forward that were shut down immediately. There were ideas I put forward that didn't work out. And I think having, like, being heard out was a big part of it. Like if you hear me out and then say we're not going to do it, I'm fine with that. But when the idea is shut down because it's coming from me, because I've been there, I'm
mm.
the third newest staff. It's like, that's not going to be good for the business for a
Yeah.
long time. For a long-term thing, that is going to be detrimental to everyone.
I agree 100%. And what's the best case scenario in that like in that situation? Well, I would say get your affairs in order, get some skills, and look for a career orientated skill developing job. And it's like it's hard to
Mm.
get a new job, especially post COVID and all that other kind of stuff. But if you can be a Roman while in Rome, also look out for your opportunities, because I've been able to change opinions very gradually over time, which is very hard and it's very stressful. But
Mm.
while you're in Rome, you've got to be like the Roman and then just look for something better, you know?
Yeah.
And like being able to take on that ability to acknowledge that you have to build new skills and you have to take a leap out forward into, the unknown is is the first step to getting out of that particular toxic brick wall that we've kind of been discussing, because it's like
Mm.
you get stuck in it. But
Yeah.
there's one thing though. There's a manager in our workplace that I spoke to one day, and I showed him genuine kindness, and I got respect from him. I'm not saying that you be kind to people. I'm saying if the opportunity presents itself for you to, how would I say it, build an actual connection, then that might be all it takes to shift people's perspectives. Um,
Yeah, I think you're right on that. And I think it's important as well because Aaron doesn't often show emotion, so when he's nice to you, it's really odd. And I I think in terms of like experience from jobs, I think from this job there's, like, obviously there's skills you'll learn that you can take forward, but I think one of the biggest things, pretty much the only thing I'll take into further, or like that will help me potentially, is the fact that I was there for nearly 4 years. That's pretty much the only thing, is that it was stable and I was there for a long time. I was consistent. And before that, I was on and off jobs every 6 months just because I didn't like it, or I was late or something. And then, to be honest, I think is the, oh, Jesus. I think that place we worked together, just beep that one out.
yeah.
That place we worked together was it almost kicked me into gear in terms of like, I'm an adult now. I need to start fucking figuring this out.
Mm,
Because every job I had before that, I was like 17 and still essentially a teenager, literally a teenager. And then that was the kind of job where I stopped being late. I started being kind of punctual.
mm,
I started being like, more serious about it. Um, and then I was there for a long time. And because I started taking that seriously, I think that was what helped me stay for a while. And then obviously a set of circumstances I couldn't control led to me leaving. But who knows? I think around the time I was there, that was probably a good time to leave because it was the time when I don't remember who told me this, but I believe they said 3 to 3.5 years is the ideal place, the ideal time frame to be at a job before being promoted. And if you're at a job where you can't be promoted, or you're not going to be promoted realistically,
Mm.
you need to leave, and you need to leave after 3 years where you've shown that you're reliable, you've shown that you're stable, and you can work these jobs for a long amount of time and do a good job while you're there, but not so long that you're kind of just in one position forever. And not to say anything about you, there's
Oh no, I get
you
you. I
don't really
get you.
have a choice. You've
Mm.
been there a long time, but there's really nowhere to go.
Mm.
And I think that's the problem, is a lot of people would stay a lot longer if there was more room for movement,
Yeah.
and getting like a 50-cent raise a year, which is, I think, losing with inflation.
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
And no, it sounds like you've gone over that already,
Yeah.
but like you can't really. Once there's a manager, it's almost like they get to decide who the next manager is, and so it's like a Putin
Yeah.
level of like, I'm gonna do it forever.
Yeah.
And I think the position you've got at the moment, and the system that's I've heard is going on there at the moment, is good. It's working and everything like that. And realistically, in that kind of job, I couldn't come up with any ideas for other roles. I
Mm.
don't think anything would work. I don't think you could make supervisors and rosterers and shift managers and shit like that, because it'd just be unnecessary. You just need people doing the job. You
Yeah.
need people doing the job. You need two people that own the place, and you need a manager, because every place has a manager. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But the problem that comes with that is generally there's a high turnover in terms of, people are in and out all the time. You're never going
Mm.
to keep people for years and years and years. But
Yeah.
I
I
guess
get
it
you.
worked to some extent for some people, and I'd probably still be there if I didn't break my leg. So,
Yeah. And like
I can't
here's
say too much bad stuff.
it's the thing. It's like it is a means to an end for starters because I've been studying for a lot of the time that I've been working at, which
Mm,
I gotta bleep that one out as well. Or I'll just leave it in. But like there is a lot of meaning. Like yes, okay, I'll back it up a bit. So there is utility in setting that 3 year deadline because you're like, okay, I've hit the brick wall. I've got to move on, get some skills, then I'll be more hireable and stuff like that. It's like now you've built a mental fortitude. You've got some like attributes on behind you, etc., etc., and hopefully you've built some skills as well. And then you can move forward into the work into a more progressive workforce. And I think that's something that we should all strive for. And yeah, it's a means to an end, really. Working a how would I say it, a non-progressive job, if we're going to call it like that. But the thing is these things do shape our mental health and our personalities. And like I've got everlasting, like how would I say it, predator detection systems when it comes to manipulation now, when considering I've worked in
mm,
a negative workplace. And I'm sure you've got it too, where you're just like, oh, that's not okay.
yeah.
And like it's also good to put a barrier between you and work. So this is another point that I was going to bring up, where it's like, okay, here's where I act like a Roman when I'm in Rome, and this is what I'm like outside of work. And there is a clear distinction between the two. And it's
Mm,
like when you're dealing with, how would I call them, liars and thieves in a workplace, it's the whole interaction is not real. It's like you're just getting by. And that can take a real toll on, well, it took a toll on me for a couple of years because I was like, do I say anything that's real? Do I
yeah.
like day in day out? Do I just fit a bill? You know, and I just wanted to kind of talk about the fact that this piece of advice is like something that me and Aaron spoke about, and I'm assuming you might do this as well. But you'd leave work at home when you come home. Like,
I try to, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, Leave work at work.
yeah. Did I say it
Yeah,
the wrong way
I
around?
try. No, I think I might have fucked it up in my head, but yeah, you're definitely right. There was a period when I first started where I was dreaming about packing orders. Bleep that out. Fucking hell, I've got to stop that.
That's okay. It's okay.
Um, But yeah, I definitely I think a lot of the problems I had with oh fucking hell.
With prior
Okay,
workplace.
a lot of the problems I had were never a problem at home, and I didn't really have to think about it. And there was the period of time where you guys would come over after work, and that was great. But I was at a point in my life at that point where I was just antisocial, and I just never wanted to talk to people, and I fucking regret that more than anything,
Mm,
honestly. I I look back on those years and I'm like, I fucking wish I took advantage of those. Because now it's not possible. I can't do that anymore. And there's like nothing I want more than just to be able to finish work and just go chill back in those times. And it's like, the time's past. It's not something that's feasible anymore. It's like, we're at the point where even if we were to try and kind of force that, it would be so unbelievably difficult. Schedules don't line up, timing doesn't work out. We live so far away, it just wouldn't ever happen.
mm,
And we're at a point where we're all finishing work on the same day at the same time, going to the same house. Half of us already live there, and so it worked so well. And then I'm just fucking in my room half the time, not talking to anyone, and it sucked. Like at the time, I was just like, yeah, this is me. I'm just introverted. I'm just quiet. But man, I wish I took advantage of that so much more. And
mm.
I don't know. I feel like even with that, I still look back on those years fondly, as in like I had a great time despite not being there for half of it. But I never had those worries come back to home. That was never really a problem for me,
Mm,
that I would go home and still have to deal with it.
mm.
And occasionally we had those nights where we'd go home and just rant about work.
Yeah,
And that was really helpful because it was an outlet. And almost everyone had the same frustrations. And we'd all go and just vent about the same shit. And it was a really good outlet. It was helpful. And then we didn't have to think about it all night. It was just like, get home, rant for half an hour, and then do something else, you know? And it
yeah,
was good. It was helpful. A lot of the time, we'd turn it into constructive things like, how can we fix this? Obviously this is a shit solution because everyone's come back to the house feeling like shit. We all want to quit our jobs because we feel like garbage after the way today went.
mm,
There was a rant session, but then it turned into, let's avoid this if possible, let's never do that again.
yeah,
And it was especially common after the big days, you know, like the big Easter days or the Christmas days where it was like, that was fucked. Let's not do that next year. We need to figure out what went wrong and we need
mm,
to plan for that. And a lot of the time we did. There was a few Christmas Eves where we'd be able to, you know, the day before, we'd be able to pack all the prawns up. And then the next day would be so much easier
mm.
because it was almost like if you were rostered on that day, months ahead, you'd just be like, fuck, I am not looking forward to that. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a huge day and
I
no
still get them.
penalties.
I still get those
Yeah.
days, and like it's it's like I do miss the old days. Like I do, I miss them very fondly. Um,
Mm,
it's like living in the modern day. I think I'm a lot wiser than what I was back then. And leaving this, like when we used to come back to the house and we used to rant and stuff about like that, that was constructive discussion. And I want to make a
mm,
clear distinction between that and, say, going home to your wife or your partner and just bickering and like sitting with the problems, because you're not talking to someone who understands what's going on, and
yeah.
you're not talking to someone who can be like, oh well, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, and it's like eh, it's I feel like it's useful to leave the day's troubles at the door and be able to separate your personality from the personality that you create at work. And it's like I used to do that when I'd come home, when I'd come back to your place with Aaron and that. I would just be like, yeah, okay, I can actually be myself now. And some of it's more natural than others. It's like then you'd bitch about certain things, or you talk about how the
Mm,
day was going. But then there would be like actual discussions about, things we were interested in or what we were working on, and like the future ahead and stuff, like legitimate conversations you wouldn't have at work because it was a toxic environment. And
yeah.
it's like I think that's a good piece of advice, and I will move on to the next piece of advice that I think that I've learned, and I want to get your opinion on it because this is very hard. But I feel like with the negative interactions that happen at work, you get the ability to not participate. And
To a degree, yeah.
yeah, yeah, this is a hard one because
There's a
you,
lot of times when you're definitely forced into a corner on it.
yeah, and like in a workplace that we were in, that's even harder to deal with because you don't have multiple managers to talk to. You've got like two
Mm.
rungs to the boss, and then it's like then you've got to go home for like say the complaint and then work with the person the next day. I don't think that's
Yeah.
very nice. But what I mean about this is like I want to kind of segue into like like a kind of mental barrier between personal life and work life because you could let your work life destroy your personal life if you decide to let that encompass who you are. You know, like I'm
Yeah.
depressed because I have to work at a non-progressive job for 4 days a week. Like I've seen people get torn apart by the fact that they work where I work. And I just wanted to kind of talk about some of those ideas. And one of them is that you can, when people are being truly negative, you can either choose to not participate or, like what you said before, maybe just minimally engage with it, you know?
Yeah.
Because back in the old days, they used to treat things like, how would I say it, like upsetting negative conversations and stuff like that. They'd kind of treat it like a disease because it is toxic to the mind,
Yeah.
engaging in overly negative conversation that isn't constructive. And the other ones that I think is that you can kind of think that the day is going to end soon. Like this interaction that I'm having with this piece of shit will end soon.
Yeah.
And there's also the flip side of that. It's like this particular part of the day is harder than other parts of the day, which means that in the future, it won't be as hard as it is right now. And then you can dispense with the rest of it, you know? Because you're really good at
Yeah.
this. You're really good at kind of just dispensing with people's negative comments and stuff like that. I'm not very good at that at all. If
Mm.
someone tears into me, I'm thinking about that constantly. And those kind of points that I wanted to bring up there um, were some of the things that helped me, well, at least my personality, be able to, you know, just get to the end of the day. Because that's all it is. It's just get to the end of the day, you know, when you're in a toxic environment and
Yeah.
look for something better.
Mm. I think it with a workplace environment, it in terms of like negative feedback or something like that, or someone saying something to you that's it's kind of um portrayed as constructive criticism or feedback, but it's just an insult.
Mm,
And there's like originally, if you're kind of new, you can try and when you're trying so hard to like make a good impression in a workplace, you either like you really just take it on, you're like, yep, I'll fix that, no worries, I'll get onto it. But when it's like a constant thing, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, yep, I'm fucking everything up. All right, I'm still new, I'm trying my best. But then it gets to a point where you think you're doing a good enough job, and when you slowly realize that a lot of these things are coming from one person, you start to think maybe this is like maybe I'm not all of these things you're saying about me. Maybe this is just your opinion. Maybe this is just what you think. And they start to devalue the more you say them. When you're constantly telling me these things, calling me these things, at the start it can really hurt, but then you kind of desensitize and you're like, you know, if I was to compare it to like if you or Aaron or like say even Emma, if if Emma was to like really say something hurtful and insulting, I would really take that to heart. Mainly because she doesn't say things like that. And I think that's a big distinction of when you're constantly getting that when it comes along when there is constructive criticism from someone like that, you don't take it on board because you're like, this is just a constant stream of you insulting me, you telling me I'm useless, you telling me I'm shit at my job.
mm,
I don't want to hear it, and I also don't really value your opinion at all anymore because it's been 3 years of constant negging, I guess. I don't
yeah.
know if that's in this term, but it's kind of like that, and it's like again, if you were to say that to me, I would take it on board instantly because you don't have that constant stream. And a lot of the things you would say to me in that kind of situation would be really positive. So I know that if you were to say something really negative like that, I would be like, okay, clearly something's going on. Clearly I've really fucked this up, or clearly this really needs to change quickly. Because otherwise you wouldn't have a reason to say that.
Mm.
And that's why it's so toxic in an environment like that where there's a constant stream of insults, a constant stream of like, do this better, change this, but there's never any good input. There's never any like good job on this. There's never any, I noticed you did this last week. Well done. That customer you served was really happy. Good job. Never any of that. It's just constant bad feedback, and that's so detrimental. And it
Mm.
creates. I was going to mention this earlier. It was a bit more relevant at the time, but I think if you create an environment at work where the people under you that have been listening to you get into a routine of coming into work to do their job and then leaving. If you get them to that point, you've ruined the whole business. If you can get them to a point where they want to come into work, they want to actually attempt to do their best, they want to try, they want to be happy for the customers if they're a, front kind of person, if they're
Yeah.
serving customers. They want to genuinely make that good impression. They want to help those people. They know that the people coming in are other people. They're humans. They want a good experience, and they can do that. They can provide that for them. If you get all of the workers in a store to be like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to take your order, put your money in the till, and then I'm going
And
to
off
fuck
you
off
go.
home, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to think about it. It's so awful. And I've worked in both sides of it. I've worked in the side where I just come in, I do not care. The place could go bankrupt tomorrow. I would not give a shit. If anything, I'd be happy. And then there's places where I've gone in and I'm like, I genuinely care about the business. I genuinely care about my boss. They've helped me through a lot of stuff, and I want to do this for them. I want to be able to help. I want to be able to provide the customers a good experience, because despite how my manager treats me, the customer isn't at fault there. And
Mm.
so if I'm coming in and just like passing off all these customers because I'm annoyed at my boss, the environment just isn't good, and it's
Mm.
going to slowly deteriorate the business. Sometimes it's really rapid, but sometimes it's over a course of years. And then when you look back on what the business was 5 years ago, you can really notice it in terms of like, yeah, I can see that we've downgraded in a lot of departments. I can see that the customers aren't as happy anymore. I've noticed they're waiting a long time. I've noticed they're coming in a great mood and leaving in a bad mood.
Mm.
And that's the kind of thing that, despite you out the back treating your workers like shit, might not directly affect the customers. Over time, that is going to be the biggest thing that affects the customers.
Yeah.
And it's so difficult to work in a place like that.
See, this is why I think remembering who you work for and what your priorities are is a meaningful thing despite you getting kicked in the shins by someone who's terrible, because eventually you will stop devaluing, you will stop valuing that person's opinion, and you will just work for the job. And like there's a distinction here between you being able to put up with negative emotion from a manager and being able to meaningfully do your job the best you can. And it's like, I think this flows into the idea of you separate out the negative person from, how would I say, your personality and the way that you run and do things. And then you end up being able to get into a position where you might get some respect from other employees and stuff like that. It might take time, but
Yeah.
it's like you end up being able to change the social game because you're playing a different game now. And with any luck, your boss might notice it and they might start taking care of you. Or like a manager in a high rung company might notice that you actually give a shit and you might actually get somewhere. And like
Mm.
sometimes at work, I have to remind myself, yes, this is a bad day, and yes, I'm dealing with bad people, but I'm working for the right person because they've always treated me nicely. And that means I should treat their
Mm.
customers nicely, and I should try and do my best. And there's a lot of meaning in that.
Yeah, I think that's what is a little difficult about what like having a small kind of business
Mm.
with one manager and then workers, If you have one manager and six workers, and especially with a relatively off in terms of like hands off boss in terms of physically being there, like a
Mm,
physical presence to see who's doing what. When when you're really making an effort and the only person who would ever like could take notice is your manager, and the only reason they would ever take notice in good terms is to promote you potentially,
mm,
but you would only ever be promoted to their job, which they would have to be removed from. It leads to a situation where they don't care. They will never say anything good about you because if they do, their job is at risk. They could
mm,
potentially be demoted, you know? And when the actual bosses aren't ever seeing you work and just taking the manager's word for it on how everyone's going, they can safely sit in that position forever,
mm.
and it's never a worry. There's never any situation where they need to give good feedback to the boss about someone who went out of their way to do something, because why would they?
Yeah,
It's nothing but a liability for them.
yeah, I
So
get you.
they just wouldn't do it.
It's hard, I know, and this is a strength of character thing, because how would I say it? Well, the first thing that you should do is find a better job. If you're stuck
Yeah.
in a situation like that, you should just, get something better, build some skills and stuff like that, which I'll get to in a minute. Because some of the reason people might stay in a job like that is because of job security. They get that paycheck at the end of the week, you know?
Mm.
And I've worked with some god awful people that shouldn't have even deserved the paycheck. And it's like
Yeah.
I want to highlight and acknowledge the fact that it's painful watching someone else do a bad job and get paid the same amount. But in saying
Mm.
that, you can dispense with that idea because it is just a judgment. And that's not as easy to do as it seems. But
Yeah.
I do think in highlighting job security, if you're an individual who, still has the potential to study or still has, their health and their potential for education sorted and they can, pay attention and open their minds to, new skills and stuff like that, you are, you have job security. You can go and find a different job in the domains that you're qualified for, and that's still job security. There's no this I want to try and get under this belief that, there won't be job security if I look for another job, because that holds
Mm.
a lot of people back. And it's like if you're a young, or even, middle age or anything, and you're able to get skills and, you've still got your health and stuff in order, you haven't run yourself down too much, you can go out there and get a different job. And I think some of the areas to focus in on here is stuff that I've identified in my Unify app, which is like a lot of it's economical discussions I had with Aaron, where it was like, well, maybe I just need to become more efficient, or maybe we need to do things differently. There was a situation at work with me and you where you decided to say something as a joke, where you're like, oh, maybe we should run it as two kitchens rather than one. And that's changed the whole
Mm.
dynamic of the shop still to this day.
Was that
And
an idea I had?
yeah, that was you. That's accredited to you. That's an Andrew Smoother change to
And
the
that's a
shop.
thing that happens currently?
Yeah, it still happens to this day.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and that was a you idea. And I'm saying
Mm.
that was a jump in efficiency
Yeah.
because not only were you chatting with Aaron and Aaron was chatting with you and then trying to figure out the best way to run things, you figured it out. And you can get relationships with other people. You can build networks with other people who may have other jobs and stuff like that, which you can define in the Unify app. If define decide, oh well, maybe I want to be a firefighter or something like that. Bit of a weird goal, but then
Mm.
you like this is a thing that I think is helpful with the Unify process because at least gives you a ballpark idea on what you've got to do and defining tools and stuff you need to learn and skills and everything like that. That's all useful stuff to making you have more job security as you bounce between other jobs and try and get a progressive career slot. And it's like we're moving away from, say, coping in a toxic workplace to, what should I aim at outside of work so that way I can get a better job with less toxic people.
Mm,
And it's like I don't have a lot of skills in this department because I technically haven't moved from a toxic workplace. But
yeah.
I acknowledge the fact that I'm very hireable, like as a laborer, bricky, or, working in other kitchens and stuff like that. Like, I can do that. Like, you can do that. You can go and, look for other jobs while you're in your current job.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't discredit that, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
um,
Yeah, I think that's the thing about where we worked. Well, not even about that place specifically, but the the skills you learn directly that you could put on a resume aren't too flashy, but
mm,
you definitely learn a lot that will translate to other like departments in managing people, working with people, like managing conflicts and that kind of thing is going to be a thing in every workplace. You're not
mm,
going to like immediately just block that off because you've moved out of that place. And the time thing, the time you're there, the length, obviously not to go back on it again, but showing that you're reliable and
yeah,
you can have
yeah.
that stable years is good. I was going somewhere else with this, but I've completely lost it.
No, no, you're
But
good. Because something come up for me as well with this, and it's
mm,
like being able to reflect on your experiences and pull out the positives and be able to write them down on paper. That's a skill in its own, regardless of what you were doing.